to the Fit and Fabulous podcast with Dr. Jaime Seaman.
Hello, everybody. It's Dr. Jaime, and welcome back to the Fit and Fabulous podcast. It is so wonderful to have you here today. I have an incredible guest on today's podcast. I have been wanting to have him on here to talk about so many things, weight training and women's and hormones, and there's so many things that you guys send me questions about, and I think this is the expert that you are going to want to hear from. So Menno Henselmans is a scientist, international public speaker, and online physique coach. I follow him on Instagram. You better go find him if you don't. But he helps serious trainees attain their ideal physique using his data-driven methods. He founded the online Henselmans PT certification that's available in 5 languages to provide evidence-based fitness education for hundreds of students each year. Recently, he published the best-selling book, The Science of Self-Control. Menno, welcome to the Fit and Fabulous podcast.
My pleasure.
So I think everybody has a story that kind of led them down their passion in life. What is yours in a few minutes?
So my story, I guess, is that I was in a career path that society wanted of me, the traditional, you climb the ladder, the corporate ladder, and you get a company car, you get a company laptop, all these things, and you're supposed to have it made. But I felt like I wasn't really happy with, and if I thought about how my life was going, and if I'd be, telling my kids or whoever, after say 40 years of more of this, would I be happy with my life? And I'd be like, well, son, today, Daddy made you very proud because I helped rip off a lot of people via an insurance company. And it's like, yeah, it's not really what I want to do with my life. So, I mean, as a consultant, that is really, when you think about it, a lot of what you do. You help a lot of companies do things to make money, which aren't necessarily things that make actually other people better off. So I started following my own passion, and that started with just writing about fitness and just my ideas of things that were wrong in the fitness industry. And there were so many that I just started writing about it. And that went well. So people started asking me for coaching. It wasn't really like, oh, I'm going to do this as a business. The business kind of came after the passion, and that went well. So people started asking me, okay, how do you get these kind of results in your clients? And that led to the PT certification, which also started when I did my own certification, more of as a test to see if I actually knew something, because I got all of my knowledge pretty much from self-education. Mm-hmm. And I have a good education, so combined with the internet, you can go a long way these days. It's really all you need. But there's always this idea of, you need an official certification to test that you really know what you know. And I found out that I had to unlearn more than I actually needed to learn extra, because there are a lot of things that they wanted you to say. And, you can't do squats in the first weeks of a program, and you have to do stretching, you have to do a cool down. And all of these things that I knew from scientific literature are outdated, but they hadn't caught up on that yet. So it was actually a very disappointing experience in that sense, but also eye-opening in the sense that I felt I could contribute a lot more to the fitness industry. So, well, fast forward that about a decade, and here we are.
Yeah, I echo a lot of what you're saying about the fitness industry and medicine, even, coming out and really kind of learning on your own and learning from your patients. There's things I've had to unlearn, and there's so many people out there with letters behind their name that just get stuck in, these same thinking patterns and thought patterns. And let's be real, there's so much we don't know about the human body. So I really appreciate you taking the approach that you do, and you put out some really amazing content. So you work with really high level physique competitors, people who are disciplined and dialed in, and you're the best, and that's why they work with you. Me, as an everyday physician, I work with women who are probably on the opposite end of that spectrum. So I think there's this disconnect of, and we're seeing it on social media, body positivity and all of this, and everybody has their own opinion about it. But what is, in your opinion, when it comes to body composition, what do you define as ideal body composition when it comes to health?
Okay, that's a good question. And I'd say it's a broad range. So most of my clients actually these days aren't like super high level competitors anymore. Most of my clients are not competitors anymore, in fact, because my prices have gone up quite a bit since there's a limit to how many clients I can get, and most contest competitors, they prefer something more affordable long term. And I think, wait, your question was about body composition?
Yeah, like ideal body composition for health.
Right. So yeah, I forgot how I wanted to go to there. But basically, it's a broad range because fat loss is inherently healthy for almost anyone. And muscle growth is also actually inherently healthy. A big thing that muscle growth does is it increases insulin sensitivity. And the more insulin sensitive you are, the lower your chronic inflammation levels. Insulin sensitivity and inflammation correlate quite strongly because when you have lower insulin sensitivity, you get more advanced glycation end products in your blood because you have higher blood sugar levels. Blood sugar is essentially inflammatory via that sense. So muscle mass protects against these things. And inflammation is a big deal. Inflammation is associated with almost any pathology we know, and especially every chronic disease state. And fat loss improves pretty much every health biomarker we know. Even when people diet down using a very unhealthy diet, like famous case was the professor that did the Twinkie diet, and he lost a lot of fat, and all of his health biomarkers improved. His diet was not literally all Twinkies, but something like that. And scientific literature has confirmed that most people, however they diet, especially if they were overweight before, pretty much all health biomarkers improve. And it goes a long way. Like when I competed, my resting heart rate on caffeine in the evening in a stressful scenario, because I had some kind of weird virus and they didn't know what was wrong, was 30. my heart rate was 30. And I have seen that similar findings in competitors where insulin sensitivity is so good that sometimes it's actually goes below the range. Like your fasting blood sugar levels are so low that they're almost hypoglycemic, and insulin sensitivity is almost literally off the charts good. And cholesterol improves, blood pressure typically goes down, heart rate goes down, cholesterol levels improve, like HDL is the same or goes up a bit, LDL goes down a lot. So almost every health biomarker we can look at, and especially things like inflammation, they get better. And there's not really a clear end sign with those things, but we do know that getting excessively lean impairs hormonal health. And for women in particular, you can readily observe this when you get to 17%. It's a range typically somewhere between 13 and 17% or so. Women lose their menstrual cycle or it becomes irregular. And that is generally an indication that your health is suffering, I would say, because the health benefits of hormones are actually quite contentious in research. But overall, I would say if your health doesn't necessarily suffer, like in terms of longevity and mortality, then your health in terms of your well-being and your mood will definitely suffer, and your health-related quality of life. So you get this big range where healthy is typically lean, but probably not like contest lean, like a competitor. And if you're losing your menstrual cycle or it becomes irregular, if you had one in the first place, that's probably too lean. And then the upper end, like the American Council of Exercise actually says 32% is already obese for women. I don't agree with that. I did an extensive review on my website of what constitutes a healthy body fat percentage. And if you look at the data there, it's like 33% is probably a good level, what you could say is overweight. And I wouldn't even call that obese yet. There are some organizations that already say that's obese or it's close to it. I would say women have quite some leeway in that sense, actually, where they are mostly healthy, at least, a lot more than men at higher body fat levels. So you have quite some leeway there in terms of what a healthy body fat level is, especially if you're exercising, sleep good, you check all the general boxes of a healthy lifestyle.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think that women have this skewed vision of, the pictures they see out there of thin, skinny, somewhat muscular women, right? They don't like these like big bulky women, but I think that there is a mismatch in the ideal of metabolically healthy and aesthetically what they want to look like. So you said that basically every person benefits from fat loss across the board, not too low, but in a general sense. So if we're focusing on muscle tissue, then what are the benefits of weight training for women?
Weight training provides a lot of benefits. A recent review actually argued, which I strongly agree with, that the health benefits of strength training are vastly underrated, especially compared to aerobic exercise. think most guidelines these days do recommend strength training. That's relatively new. It used to be that aerobic exercise was recommended and strength training was seen as something that's, yeah, maybe okay, but we actually now know that aerobic and strength exercise have somewhat distinct benefits, and strength training is much better, obviously, at stimulating muscle growth. And like I said, muscle growth is actually very healthy. And muscle growth correlates with longevity. Like, more muscular people literally live longer. I think Mark Ripito had a nice quote: "Strong people are harder to kill." And
Yes.
it's
I wrote a
quite
book
true.
called Hard to Kill. I wrote a book
Right.
Hard to Kill. It's right back here.
Perfect. So yeah, I mean, it's literally true. It's harder to kill or to perish in general if you're very strong, you're muscular, just your whole body is strong. And many of the health benefits of aerobic exercise are also gained via strength training. So you also typically get somewhat better blood sugar, improvement in your cholesterol. Benefits are a little bit less, but a meta-analysis by Clark et al. Actually found that strength training, when you're comparing it per minute of exercise, results in greater health benefits than aerobic exercise in the long term, because it's typically more effective for muscle growth. And that is part of the reason that's also typically more effective for fat loss, because it increases your metabolic rate in the long run. There's also some research indicating it's better for suppressing your appetite than aerobic exercise. And the acute difference in energy expenditure isn't that high. There's also research that energy expenditure is more constrained with aerobic exercise. So if you do a lot of aerobic exercise, you get tired afterwards, essentially. And that's your nervous system trying to compensate with your energy expenditure. So there is a limit to how much you can bump up your energy expenditure by just doing more and more cardio. That's also why you can't out-diet or you can't outrun a bad diet. You can't out-train a bad diet. And strength training doesn't have that effect, it seems. It seems that strength training is mostly exempt from constrained energy expenditure. So because of these reasons, decrease in muscle mass, increase in energy expenditure long-term, we actually see that most people lose more fat when they do, say, you take up 2 hours of exercise per week. When it's strength training, as opposed to endurance training, people lose more fat. And because the fat loss is so healthy combined with muscle mass, they see bigger health benefits as well, which is actually kind of crazy because we've been so indoctrinated with endurance training is like the good stuff and strength training is just for vanity metrics and whatever. Yeah. But like this meta-analysis essentially shows it's for practical purposes the other way around. And in my experience, that is definitely the case, because if you're just doing aerobic exercise, and don't get me wrong, aerobic exercise is great for your health, but you typically plateau at a certain level. Like your body composition won't improve beyond a certain point. And then also the health benefits mostly stop. And with strength training, you are investing in a much more long-term positive development. Now for optimal health, probably you need both, but you may also get into a ceiling effect where you don't need that much exercise to be super healthy.
Yeah. I mean, I think weight training in and of itself is a cardiovascular exercise. So if you're a busy mom like me, I've got 3 kids. If I only have 20, 30, 40, 60 minutes to spend in the gym, I tell my patients, you heard it right here, you guys, the fastest way to fat loss is to actually focus on gaining muscle. So I think what women fear about going into the gym and lifting weights is that they're going to look like this steroid enhanced woman on the cover of Women's Physique magazine. Can you talk about the muscular potential of women? How a woman would even get close to, training like that to achieve that kind of physique?
Yeah, it's a funny topic because one of the most popular articles I ever wrote was about the muscular potential of women. And there I showed, which I think is basically the first time that anyone demonstrated this at least in a popular manner, that men and women actually have the same relative muscular potential. But women start off with a lot lower baseline muscle mass. Men are simply bigger. Like an untrained man is bigger than an untrained woman on average. And as a result, if you add, say, 50% muscle to either's frame, then the men stay bigger. And for a woman to end up looking like a man, like actually having a physique like that of a man, is very difficult. Your proportions are inherently different. Like you have more lower body mass, like your hips are wider, just the whole frame is different. So even if you're maximizing your muscular potential, most women will not look like men. It's just, you just have a very different look, a different aesthetics, different frame. So even if you do lots and lots and lots of strength training, you can get very muscular as a woman, but it's gonna take a lot of work. It's gonna take years and it will not make you look super masculine, and especially not overnight. I always say, when anyone has this fear, some men also have it, let's just do, if you have enough time in the week, we're just going to maximize muscle growth essentially and see where we get. And whenever you feel like it's getting too big, all we have to do is stop exercising, because it's super easy to lose it. And in the meantime, it's a great way to burn additional calories, to get stronger, to set personal best, to develop yourself. And so there are no downsides to getting to that point. And it's very easy to fix it if you really feel like, oh, now I'm getting too bulky. And speaking of bulkiness, I would say the vast majority of the time, I'm inclined to say something like 99%, but I typically don't like it when people throw out random figures. If a woman feels that she's too bulky, in reality, she has too much body fat. Like, she would like to be leaner, especially with the thighs. What I often like to tell clients is, can you see muscle striations or at least veins? Because if not, there is also a lot of fat covering that area.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a bad thing. Women, especially if you want a big booty, for example, then you want some fat in the area and you want big muscles underneath. If you just have the big muscles, then you get more the male shape of the gluteus. And if it's lean, like if there's literally no more fat on the gluteal muscles, you get the glute striations, which actually that's not something most women want, or even can get. It's the hallmark of pro-level conditioning and female bodybuilding in competitors that are on performance-enhancing drugs. So that's something you might get after ridiculous, extensive dieting, years of training, and using anabolics. And even then, you won't get it. So by and large, women don't have to worry about getting too big. It's something that, even if it would happen, it's very easy to remedy.
That's awesome. Okay, you heard it, ladies. Just lift. You're not going to turn into a man. Are there sex differences in strength and fitness between men and women?
There are. Women are generally better at endurance tasks, and men are a bit better at short, explosive kind of tasks. And that coincides with our evolutionary past, which is not at all that women were sitting at home and doing nothing. Is that women were more involved with manual labor, work around the camp, and men were like out hunting more dangerous animals. But women were also foraging, carrying their kids, working in the camp, doing manual labor, carrying meat home, and doing a lot of very physically demanding labor. Like, it's not in women's evolutionary history to be physically inactive. That is a complete myth. But the exercise that women and men did has diverged a little bit, with men doing more fighting and like aggressive hunting of dangerous animals. So they have evolved to be a little bit stronger, even relative to muscle mass. But the relative strength increase you can get is actually similar. And when you both get to the maximum level, one review found that women have about 80% of the strength as men. Another found basically the same when equated for muscle mass. So it's not a large difference. And we mainly see the difference when you're doing very explosive, coordinated movements like throwing a javelin. Men would perform quite a bit better on that, and women perform better on endurance tasks. And that's also in part why they have better metabolic health. They have better blood flow, essentially better higher vasodilation, lower arterial compression. And based on that, you see that women get, like I said, better metabolic health and also better suited for endurance, which also means that in the gym, at a given percentage of your 1RM, so a given training intensity, an exercise it's called, you see that women can do more repetitions than men. Mm-hmm. And it's quite a big difference when you're looking at 60% of 1RM, where men may do 20 and women may do 25 or more. And some women, it's really extreme. We had one study where we looked at deadlifts, and we did 60% of 1RM for I think it was the sumo deadlift. And we had one woman in the study, and she did, I think, 85 reps. And then she was like, shall I keep going, or do you want me to stop?
She killed it. Is the endurance better in women because of the fuel that's being utilized? Is it hormones? Why are women less fatigable?
It seems to be mostly metabolic. There might be something hormonal, but it doesn't seem to depend on the hormones. It seems mostly because women have better vasodilation, lower arterial compression. So basically, women have better muscle perfusion, and they can get blood more easily towards their muscles. Women also tend to have, especially trained women, a higher proportion, both in terms of volume and in terms of total muscle fibers, more type 1 fibers, bigger type 1 fibers, which are more slow twitch, more oxidative, and are better suited for endurance training like repetitions, long-term activity, as opposed to the type 2 fibers, which are more explosive and more suited for quick, high bursts of lots of energy expenditure and then rest afterwards.
Okay, fascinating. Okay, so one of the big differences, obviously, between men and women is that women are physiologically complex. When they're menstruating, we have different hormonal profiles depending on what day of the week, what week of the month, whatever it is. So can you talk about estrogen's role in muscle health for both men and women, I suppose?
Yeah, estrogen is one of those hormones that's often vilified, at least in terms of bodybuilding and fitness circles. And that's a reputation that mostly comes from male steroid users, interestingly, where high estrogen levels cause bloating, it causes water retention, and makes them look bad, and then they think it makes them fat, but it's not true, it's water retention. And as a result, estrogen is kind of seen as the opposite of testosterone, where testosterone gives you muscle mass, improves your performance, and estrogen is seen as something detrimental, but actually estrogen is very beneficial. And there's even a recent study that found that women on hormone replacement therapy, which includes giving them higher levels of estrogen, improves muscle growth and some markers of performance. And there are lots of studies that show that estrogen itself is actually anti-catabolic, so it preserves muscle mass, and it even is mildly anabolic. It has beneficial effects on insulin sensitivity and many metabolic processes, glucose uptake. So it's also good for your joints, for your connective tissues to stay injury-free. Low estrogen levels are notoriously hard on the joints. So estrogen is actually mostly a very positive, good hormone, both for men and women.
In a premenopausal versus postmenopausal woman, so let's say a woman's gone through menopause, she's 55 years old, she's still strength training, she's not on hormone replacement therapy. You're saying that the muscular potential is a lot less, or there's just going to be an increase in catabolic state in these women?
It's not known if the total maximum muscular potential is lower, but it probably it will be. So hormones are essentially the mediating factor for why you don't see as many 70-year-olds with the same level of muscle mass as 20-year-olds. Mostly that's due to physical inactivity and a worse diet, and that accumulating over long periods of time, essentially catching up with people. But there is probably some decrease, and it's most likely mediated by the decreases we see during menopause. I mean, they are very substantial. Estrogen is like 20-fold or something. Testosterone can be cut in half. Depends a bit on the woman, but they're very, very big effects. And like I said, we see that in research, when you give women these hormones back, essentially, it actually helps them gain muscle. And we also see that in women that don't do strength training, giving them hormone replacement therapy typically improves their body composition a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Does progesterone have any role in the muscle tissue?
It does. It seems to be mostly negative. Estrogen seems to be mostly positive. Progesterone can inhibit testosterone, essentially, because it can react with the androgen receptor, thereby essentially blocking testosterone from doing its job. And we have one good study on contraceptives, where they found that the degree of prostaticity of the pill, though basically the more progestin was in the pill, the worse the interference with muscle growth was. And it's not estrogen that's detrimental, because some other researchers actually found that taking oral contraceptives with high dose estrogens augments muscle growth. It's like 30 micrograms. Seems
of
to be
estradiol.
Yeah. It seems to be like the dose where it may actually start getting positive effects.
So for people listening, just to say that in a different way than Menno said it. So birth control pills come in multiple combinations of mostly ethinyl estradiol and then a synthetic progestin. And there's lots of different ones: levonorgestrel, norethindrone acetate. There are some newer progestins on the market, one particularly called drospirenone, which is actually anti-androgenic. So depending on the androgenicity, or some even being anti-androgenic, it could have a profound impact on muscle tissue and strength. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah.
Most research finds no negative effects. That's probably because the estrogens are net positive, and then the progestin is net negative, and anti-androgens are almost certainly net negative, or they're just negative. There's no positive aspect at all. So it's neutral in a lot of research if you're selecting the right pill with relatively low progestin, high estrogen levels.
Interesting. Because there are some progesterone only pills on the market, particularly this new one called drospirenone. And it's so new, I haven't seen it studied, but it's one that we use for PCOS patients because of its anti-androgenic effect. And then they don't necessarily need more estrogen a lot of times because they have extra body fat. But it really makes my wheels turn kind of thinking about it, because the other thing that these pills do is increase sex hormone binding globulin, which tends to bind up their testosterone and lower their free testosterone. So I think that there's definitely implications that people have to think about there.
Yeah. Testosterone levels go down in most people on the pill.
Do you think that women who, in a menstruating woman, she's not taking any sort of birth control that shuts down her HPA axis, the first 2 weeks of the cycle, very estrogen dominant, the second 2 weeks of the cycle, loss of estrogen, much more progesterone, do you think women should train differently?
There is some research that women gain more muscle when they do more of their training in the follicular cycle. And in part because of the ratio of testosterone and estrogen to progesterone is better. That seems to be kind of the driving force for that, because like I said, testosterone and estrogen are generally good, and progesterone is, I mean, it's not a bad hormone, it has positive functions as well, but in terms of your body composition, it's mostly negative. So we have 6 studies or something on that. 3 found benefits, 2 found a trend, something like that. 1 found no effect, or so the literature isn't extremely clear, but it does strongly err in the direction of your training volume being more effective for muscle growth in the follicular phase, so that the first 2 weeks.
I would say I personally agree with that. I notice in my first 2 weeks, I can hit a PR, I recover so much quicker, my joints feel better. And then I get to luteal phase and it is like, oh man, it's rough. And I'm sure there's some woman out there listening that knows exactly what I'm talking about. It's hard having no estrogen at all. Okay, so let's go back to testosterone. I think that's not a hormone that women think about a lot. They think that's more of like a male hormone. So can you highlight again the role of testosterone in body composition for women?
Yeah, it's actually funny that testosterone is seen as the male hormone, estrogen as the female hormone. And I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And then people think, well, men have a lot more testosterone than women. Women have a lot more estrogen than men, all true. Therefore, women must have more estrogen than testosterone. And actually, women most of the time have higher testosterone than estrogen levels. And even at peak estrogen levels, they are kind of similar as testosterone levels. So technically, testosterone is still the dominant sex hormone, or androgens in general are the dominant hormone class for both men and women. And testosterone is absolutely important for women. It has mostly the same effects as in men, but the levels are much lower. So like you don't get the extreme virilization effects unless you get to much higher levels for very, very long periods of time. Up until that point, testosterone is good for your libido, it's good for your like hair quality, skin quality, all these things. So it's a very positive hormone to have. And I think women that get low testosterone levels, just like men with age, should also consider adding testosterone in their hormone replacement therapy protocol.
Yeah, I was just about to ask about testosterone therapy because I do it for my patients, but of course we don't have an FDA approved on-label use of it, so it's off-label. And I think that there are hormone clinics like selling both men and women loads of hormones, probably super physiologic levels. And I've of course seen the downsides of that. Are there downsides when it comes to body composition, optimizing that to doing hormone replacement therapy, or is it just doing it in the right way?
Well, hormone replacement therapy should only be positive for your body composition. Testosterone is super positive. The more you take, the better your body composition, essentially. And estrogen also seems to be mostly positive. So I would say it's only good. And in general, you can think of hormone replacement therapy, emphasis on the replacement. It's not steroid use. It's you're replacing what is lost. So it essentially undoes many of the side effects of menopause. For example, if you get bone loss during menopause in relation to low estrogen levels, you're undoing that with replacement therapy. And it's the same with testosterone, with vaginal dryness, loss of libido, these kind of things that you might get during menopause. You're undoing those with testosterone replacement therapy.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of it. And, I think it's even more than body composition. We know with loss of estrogen, there's increased oxidative stress, there's more inflammation, more insulin resistance, and we know that estrogen changes gene transcription within the mitochondria. So I think there's, huge benefits. It's very anti-aging and better at mitigating loss than it is at reversing things. So it's important for women to kind of go into menopause having that conversation and not 10 years down the road. We know that. Okay, so let's shift to pregnancy. Certainly one of the greatest physiologic stresses of a woman's lifetime. Do you think that there are changes in the way that people train in pregnancy that make a difference?
Well, I think the most important thing is to keep training. Whereas the traditional advice, like this is pretty dated by now, fortunately, but it's basically go home, sit on your ass and watch TV, and that's terrible, terrible advice.
Eat a bucket of ice cream.
Yes, exactly. Gain a lot of weight. And for example, the weight gain advice is typically seen as dated, like especially in obese women. They find that for one, you don't have to be in energy surplus to gain weight. Like you'll gain weight because of you're making a human inside you. It's going to grow. It has a lot of mass.
Growth hormone.
So that's going to increase your weight to begin with, even if you're not gaining body fat. And it's well established now that your body composition, both when you become pregnant and at the time of birth, have very significant effects on the health of the child, as well as yourself. So exercising is really good for both your health and the health of the child. And yeah, it's just mind-blowing that there's still advice that exercise is contraindicated for pregnant women. In my experience, it's maybe a little bit on the other side, but I've had many clients that could do strength training, basically literally going up to the pregnancy, like days before. And as long as you're reasonable, you're not, doing heavy like jumping exercise or Muay Thai fighting where they knee you in the stomach, those kind of things, or you're gonna put heavy objects on the stomach or whatever, just use some common sense. Most strength training exercises are very controlled movements that you can do very safely in a controlled environment, and you can stop at the first sign of any discomfort. As long as you listen to your body signals in that way, my experience is that most women can basically strength train all the way up to delivery and then resume afterwards as well quite quickly too, and regain or even maintain a good body composition throughout the whole process.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's probably a few things to consider. One is that progesterone and a hormone called relaxin, which help loosen our ligaments and tendons so that a baby can physically fit through the pelvis, increase the risk of injury. So I always tell people, like don't be doing any moves, especially like over your head or something like that you don't normally do. But I agree. I have patients that train through pregnancy. I take care of, some CrossFit athletes that still compete sometimes. The estrogen in pregnancy is like 30-fold higher than when you're not pregnant. And we've talked about the benefits of estrogen to muscle tissue. And but there's a lot of progesterone too, but I think it almost goes back to the birth control. It's kind of like the net positives and negatives. There's a lot of progesterone, but there's also a lot of estrogen. So
more testosterone too.
Yeah. I mean, everything, growth hormone, human placental lactogen. It's like a hormonal crock pot there of so many different things. When it comes to optimizing body composition for women, do you think that there are supplements that are helpful? Like if you had to pick your top 3.
It would mostly be the same as for men.
Okay.
Creatine monohydrate is pretty much the GOAT, greatest of all time, studied, which is not that impressive, but in terms of safely and legally increasing muscle growth and strength development in people that respond to it, because not everyone does, creatine monohydrate is pretty much as good as it gets. And 3 grams for women every day, post-workout or first meal of the day is ideal. It's a very safe, good way to improve your gains a little bit. Might also have some health benefits, especially in the elderly. Recent meta-analysis found that it improves memory performance in the elderly, for example. So that's something I would typically recommend. About 33% of women and men as well are non-responders, which means you're not going to notice anything. Still, if you're not really sure, I would just take it because it's super cheap, a bit less cheap now than it used to be, but it's still cheap, safe, effective for most people. So I would just take it. Other than that, you have fish oil if you don't consume enough fish in your diet, and some micronutrients. But in terms of like supplements that really make you gain muscle or lose fat, there's not much there. There are no magic pills.
So the fat burners at the supplement store are not what they crack out to be. Is that what you're saying?
No, the fat burners, in the whole term fat burner is a misnomer, if not a lie, by advertising agencies, because they make you oxidize body fat, yes, because they increase your energy expenditure, but they will not make you lose adipose tissue, as in make you lose body fat, because that's predicated on being an energy deficit. Or in rare cases, you can lose fat without energy deficit, but typically it requires energy deficit. And if you're not doing anything with your diet and you're just taking a fat burner, it's not going to do anything. So it might increase your energy expenditure by a few percent, and it's 99% of it is due to caffeine, and it's very short-lived because you become tolerant to the effect. And the other stuff is not legal, and most fat burners also contain amphetamines and compounds that are not legal, but they put them in there because in the US in particular, there's very little control on supplements, almost none, as opposed to drugs or hormones. And yeah, so you really don't even know what you're putting in your body. And even if it does work and it is an effective stimulant, which is a better word than fat burner, then simply what it does is it probably decreases your appetite a little bit, and it increases your energy expenditure a little bit, therefore resulting in a more negative energy balance, which over the long term gradually might help you lose a little bit more fat. But the latest meta-analysis found that fat burners literally do nothing.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I've had female clients come to me, their trainers have put them on DHEA, so another over-the-counter androgen. Any evidence of that for women?
Not a lot. I think it has some applications for people with low hormone levels. I've seen some studies, mostly in men, elderly men, that it can improve testosterone for people with hypogonadism. But I'm not aware of a lot of research that it does much worthwhile in someone that's already healthy. And it also doesn't seem to be crucial to add to an HRT protocol or anything. So I think it's a niche compound.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, how about BCAAs and EAAs?
Well, those are completely useless for someone that's consuming enough protein in their diet, because you get them in the protein. That's literally the point of consuming the protein, that like your body doesn't have protein requirements. It has amino acid requirements for all the amino acids, and in particular the essential ones. And we define a protein source as being high quality when its amino acid ratio is like that of the body, which typically means it's from an animal source, because animals, like animal meat, our meat, is similar in makeup. So when we consume enough of a high quality protein source, we're consuming enough of all the amino acids. So you don't need to consume any type of amino acids, whether it's an essential one, BCA, a non-essential one, it doesn't matter, glutamine, all of them is the same. You're eating the protein to get those amino acids. So when you're doing that, any supplementation on top of that is redundant. And in that light, the optimal protein intake for most people is at least 1.6 gram per kilogram per day of total body weight of protein. I typically recommend 1.8. Women are probably okay with 1.6, but I would still recommend 1.8 because the effective body weight is not that large. And if your body weight isn't that high, then I would generally be reluctant of going under, say, 100 grams of protein for strength training women.
So that's going to be close to like a gram per pound, only because I have a lot of American listeners.
Yeah, close. It's about, I think 1.8 is 0.82 grams.
0.8, yeah, 0.82, I think. Yeah. So, okay, so you heard him, 0.82 to maybe up to a gram per pound of body weight. And is that best divided into multiple meals? What is the best way to divide that in a 24-hour period?
At least 3 meals a day is ideal. 4 is safest, 3 is doable if you are especially sandwiching your workout, assuming you are working out, between say 6-hour, ideally 5-hour intermeal interval. So let's say you have lunch at noon and then 5 p.m. you have your next meal. In between there you work out. That should be okay. Ideally, probably within 1 or 2 hours of your workout, pre-workout you eat, but it's fine tuning. most important thing is that you're not training fasted, and that you have a good provision of amino acids before the workout, and in at least 2 meals, ideally after the workout, or one really big one. And then, yeah, spread it out a little bit across the day. But most literature finds that even an 8-hour eating window or so is fine, especially on a weight loss diet, at least. To maximize muscle growth, maybe 8-hour eating window is not going to cut it, but it's fine tuning for sure.
Yeah, I think you bring up some good points, because fasting, intermittent fasting is like all the rage. So you said don't train in a fasted state. What should somebody consume prior to a workout?
Anything they would want to consume at another time, pretty much. In our latest review of this in the literature, we recommended at least 15 grams of net carbohydrate and at least 0.3 gram protein, so about 20 gram high quality protein minimum. You can consume more if you want, somewhere before the workout. I recommend not thinking of it as a pre-workout meal, just a meal. Because when you think pre-workout meal, people start thinking supplements and shakes and bars and whatever. And you can just have a meal. You can have a normal meal. If you want it to be super fast, because you wake up in the morning, for example, you need something quick. It can be maybe some smoked turkey, smoked salmon, and wrap it around avocado slices, or have an apple. There are a lot of ways that you can very quickly make a meal. Greek yogurt and berries. So it's just about being creative, getting some protein and some carbs in there, and making sure it also is a nutritious meal and it's satiating and that fosters long-term health and sustainable living. Because I think a lot of people with the pre-workout or in post-workout meals, they start thinking in a very different frame of mind compared to normal meals, and they've kind of forsake health benefits, and they start consuming and slamming down dextrose shakes, for example, and that's just pure sugar. So I don't see much merit to that.
Should people eat differently on days they train versus maybe a rest day or a recovery day?
It's not necessary, but I do think in terms of fine tuning, it will be beneficial for your nutrient partitioning. There's some research that indicates, for example, that when you consume the majority of your calories in the early part of the day, and then you work out later, versus consuming most of the calories in the later part of the day, which is the post-workout period, you get a better ratio of muscle to fat loss / gain when you consume the calories after the workout. So basically, after the workout, the idea is that your muscles are more primed for protein synthesis, and they can utilize whatever foods you consume to gain muscle, and therefore the energy is preferentially utilized for muscle growth rather than fat storage. So you get a better ratio of muscle growth and fat loss, as opposed to if you eat all your calories before and they might be stored as fat, and then later you have your workout, your body wants to gain muscle, but you don't give it energy, and then it might not build as much muscle. We don't have a lot of research on this, so it's somewhat speculative, but like I said, we have a few studies where that kind of backloading the calories seems to be beneficial in exercising individuals. So I tend to err on the side of doing that. And I also like a strategy of having protein sparing modified fast days. If you have, for example, 1 or 2 rest days per week, you could make those very low calorie days, and that frees up calories to move to your anabolic windows, basically the post-workout periods on your training days, where that energy is more likely to be put to use for muscle growth. And it's not a given that this improves your gains a lot, but I think the theory is sound and there is some evidence to support it. So you definitely can't go wrong with it. And therefore I typically recommend it for most people that are willing to fine tune a bit more. Like if you I just want one diet, one stable meal plan, just want to eat the same things every day, it's perfectly viable. You can probably fine tune things a little bit, shift some more calories towards the anabolic window periods, so the post-workout periods, like not just the 1 hour after that, but basically the whole period until you go to bed, and optimize your results a bit further.
Okay, I'm doing a couple things right and a couple things wrong. I work out fasted. I get out of bed at 5 in the morning and I head straight to the gym, but I eat all of my calories post-workout. So that's good to hear. Okay, let's talk about fat and carbs. What are your thoughts about low carb ketogenic diets versus low fat diets when it comes, and high carb?
For most intents and purposes, it doesn't actually matter that much. There is a very strong, almost political / ideological debate now between high carb, low carb, and keto, non-keto. But if you look at muscle growth and fat loss and strength development, they seem to pretty much be the same regardless of intake. Now, I do think that a very low fat intake is not a good idea, and a pure like carnivore diet with 0 carbs is also not a good idea. But even a targeted ketogenic diet can be sufficient. Like in our latest systematic literature review, we found that even ketogenic diets and low carb diets are equally viable for muscle growth as higher carb diets, as long as you have at least 15 gram net carbs before the workout. And you can still have 30 to 50 gram net carbs typically on a ketogenic diet, and it should be enough combined with a sufficient protein intake. And then on the other side of the spectrum, it's probably not a good idea to get your fat intake below about 20%, ideally maybe higher if you have the calories. I like women to be up to even 30, 40% fat intake because it supports anabolic hormonal health. And even though we don't see benefits of that yet in research, it stands to reason that greater testosterone production, greater estrogen levels, which we do see in research from higher fat diets, that those will translate into long-term greater muscular development. It takes a while before those changes occur, even with hormone replacement therapy, even steroid use. It typically takes a month or so before you see any change in your body composition or muscle protein synthesis levels, because the effects of hormones are largely genomic. So they take a long time to function. It's like you're rebuilding your body from the ground up. It's not like you're just higher testosterone levels, like you get bigger. No, it's like higher testosterone level tells your body, okay, we need to rebuild everything, and we want to be a bit bigger. So the body's going back to the blueprint and saying, okay, we need more of these proteins, building those, remodeling all the tissues, and you end up a bit bigger. It's a very slow process. And I think with fat intake, you kind of also see that, where low fat diets tend to be okay for short term, but in the long term, people get insane appetite and probably also exacerbates low hormone levels from the dieting.
Yeah, I always had a really poor perception of my female physique patients, because I was the one testing their testosterone and estrogen was like 0, their overall health, their thyroid was horrible. So I always kind of had this bad view. My husband decided to compete in his first bodybuilding competition in 2020, but he took a ketogenic approach. Robert Sykes, Keto Savage, was his coach. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. I'm going to like test your blood. This, like, I'm the science nerd. And he did, he maintained his testosterone levels, even in a much lower body fat. And I'm like starting to think through, okay, this makes sense. As long as calories are equated, the higher fat may be protective, but I wondered about for women, what that would do. So I decided to experiment for myself, went through my first competition last year, and really maintained pretty good levels until like 1 week before my show. I lost my period right before the show, probably because my body fat dipped below 17%. But it's a fascinating thought for me too, because ketones work as a cellular signaling molecule. And I believe, tell me if I'm wrong, or if you've seen anything different, have some anti-catabolic effect. So I wonder too, if it helps with muscle mass preservation as somebody is dieting down. Do you have thoughts on that?
There is some research. There's one study from, I think, the 80s, where they did find that it improved nitrogen retention and lean body mass retention. Most subsequent literature of higher quality has failed to replicate that finding. It seems that it's pretty much the same. You could make a little bit of a case from some of the literature that people end up with just as good of a muscle retention and better fat loss with lower energy intakes on keto diets. But overall, I would say it's not a big effect. And any effect that we mostly see in research is probably because people end up consuming a high protein diet and naturally decreasing their energy intake. So it's in practice a very good way to lose fat for people that don't suffer any of the adverse effects of ketogenic dieting, which I think are mostly mental to begin with.
Yeah. Okay. Tell us how you eat. What do you eat in a day? I saw you had an Instagram reel on this, because people ask me all the time. They are obsessed with knowing what I eat in a day. How do you train?
Yeah, I made when I was doing a mini cut, I did like a short video on it, but now I'm bulking again, and I have typically 3 big meals, or sometimes a snack at the end if I don't get all my calories in. In the morning, I start with Greek yogurt with berries, and then sometimes I add like an almond crumble to that, basically nuts. And then I have typically potatoes with pesto for lunch. And then in the evening, something like rice with a big peanut sauce for dinner. And then if I have calories left, I'll add some peanut butter sandwiches, preferably sourdough bread or almond butter. Also have some pistachio butter now. I like to experiment a bit with different kinds. So lots of good, healthy monounsaturated fats, general just whole foods based diet, high protein intake, well, when bulking, it's high everything, high fat, high carb. I'm on 4,000 calories a day. So I have the calories to make sure I get in all the nutrients I want. And if I don't eat fish, then typically I supplement the omega-3s. But I also like sushi a lot. And I think sushifaq.com is a pretty good website where you can track the calories from sushi pretty accurately. Usually it's about 60 per big piece or 50 if it's not fatty fish. And so I eat sushi a lot as well. And yeah, that's pretty much how I bulk 90% of the time these days. Very consistent diet.
How many weeks, months, like in a year, or maybe even a few year span should somebody be if they're cutting versus bulking? Is there an ideal ratio there? Because I feel like people are constantly, everyone's trying to cut 365 days a year.
Yes. I mean, if you want to get leaner, you should cut. But at some point, you should be able to get to your ideal body fat level. And from that point on, you should probably spend at least 3 times a month, 3 times as much time bulking as cutting. And it can be 4, even 6 times in some individuals. So you only have to cut 1 week for every 6 weeks of bulking. If you do it well, you do a lean bulk, especially for women. I find that this approach is typically the best. Lean bulk, maybe some mini cuts, maybe menstrual periodization where you have the follicular phase where you bulk and then the luteal phase where you can cut. You can do that as well. And don't go too high up in body fat level, do more frequent, shorter cuts. And you should not spend a lot of your time cutting. You should spend a lot of your time bulking, eating lots of food you enjoy, I would say.
Yeah, I'm in the same phase right now. I'm bulking. As a woman, it's hard. It's hard to go from being really lean to not being as lean, and you feel so much bigger really than you look. So what is the best way to track body composition?
That's in practice. I mean, there's a gold standard, which is like underwater weighing or a 4C compartment model. In practice, I find that most people are best off with either good body fat calipers and or circumference tape combined with your weight, and then combine that with your objective strength data for your program. You have a very good combination of indicators that you can look at. If you see that your weight's increasing and your strength is increasing, but your waist circumference, your thigh circumference, and your caliper measurements are not, that's a very good indication you're gaining lean muscle mass, for example.
Yeah, we have, my husband and I opened a business here in our town with a DEXA machine. So now I have access to that. And I just find it such a valuable way for people to track, especially for women, not only because it gives us so many markers of their lean tissue, but visceral fat as well, which I think, there's even studies on just waist circumference, which is a proxy for visceral fat. And I've seen MRI, slices of people with the same waist circumference, and one has significantly more visceral fat than the other. So I think there's such good data there. But I think that is something that people need to hear, is that just using the weight on the scale is a really hard way to track progress.
Yeah, there's even a recent study, I think, a review paper that basically concluded for women, overall body fat level is almost irrelevant. It's almost exclusively how much visceral fat you have. Now, of course, those correlate strongly. If you're obese, probably you also have a lot of visceral fat. And if you're at contest stage shredded, you have like muscle striations everywhere. It's extremely unlikely that you have any significant amount of visceral fat. But yeah, it's nice to be able to test it for sure.
What are your thoughts about? So we've told people resistance training is where it's at. What do you think about like sprint training in addition to weightlifting?
I mean, if you enjoy sprinting, it's a fine way to exercise, but high intensity interval training is a form of cardio. Actually doesn't have a great track record. A recent meta-analysis found that it impairs muscle growth more than low intensity steady state cardio because of the interference effect. Basically, if you're doing sprinting, especially in the same session, or even worse before the workout, like sprints with short rest intervals in between, like the Bata protocols, 20-second sprint, 10-second rest, 20-second sprint. It's essentially training like a soccer player. So that is a very strong endurance stimulus. It's not a strength stimulus. It's not training like a sprinter. You're training like a soccer player. And that has the associated metabolic effects, interference on muscle growth, a lot of fatigue, fine way to burn energy, but you can do the same with strength training. So I'd say that if If you like sprinting, or if you want to be a sprinter or something, you have to do sprints for your sport. Great, but I don't think it's a particularly great form of cardio if your primary goal is fat loss.
Fascinating. Okay, so another question that I get from female followers, we see a lot of women's physique competitors that have breast implants. Do you think there's a different way that those women should be training, especially when it comes to chest, or does it matter?
Mm-hmm. A little bit. Assuming the implants are artificial, and then the big differentiator is, are they subpectoral or not? If they're over the pecs, then they don't interfere much. You have to go a little bit by comfort. Some exercises, I mean, if you're doing like a pec fly and you literally feel the implants being crushed, then yeah, probably that's not great. So you just have to use some common sense, go by your feeling. You may feel like a big stretching sensation during some motions. Probably want to avoid too much of an extreme feel, anything that feels very wrong. If it's subpectoral, so you put the implant under the pecs, under the breast muscle, which is more aesthetically pleasing for some purposes because it creates a more natural look. It's harder to see that it's an implant and not a natural breast. Then you're cutting off quite some of the chest fibers, like up to a third, even 16%, 33%, some research of the chest fibers literally have to be cut off. Like they have to be removed for the implant to be able to get in that gap. And those fibers are gone. You're not getting them back. So it has a significant effect on strength in the pecs. And if you're an athlete and you make a living, especially if you make a living where it's like a big thing for you to bench press or do a type of sport where your pec muscles are important, you do not want subpectoral implants because they are going to permanently harm your competitive performance. Now, if you're just training to look good, and it's more important that you have big breasts than big pec muscles, which is the case probably for the majority of women, then it doesn't really matter. You should just avoid training that body part too much. And again, go by comfort. If you feel like extreme stretching sensation, you feel like the implant's being crushed, don't do those exercises. Most women find that pec work in general is going to be difficult after a subpectoral implant. It might be pretty much impossible. Like any pec exercise might aggravate it. Pull downs, those kind of exercises, which still activate like the lower pecs to some extent, might also be problematic. So yeah, you might have to work around that.
Okay, fascinating. All right, you guys, we're going to move to our last segment here, the semen analysis. So Menno and I talked about some of the implications of hormonal contraceptives or birth control pills and their implications on muscle gains. I pulled a study that's called Evidence for Stress-Like Alterations in the HPA Axis in Women Taking Oral Contraceptives. And this was published in, let's see if I can find the date here. It was 2017 in Science Rep Journal. And they basically were looking at the stress-related disorders. One of their outcomes was really depression. The hypothesis being that oral contraceptives deregulate our HPA axis and elevate circulating cortisol levels. So that is how they work. They shut down your HPA axis and stop you from ovulating. But the sample was 233 premenopausal women, and they were all taking oral contraceptives. And what they observed was alterations in circulating phospholipid levels and elevated triglycerides, and found evidence that there was increased glucocorticoid signaling. And they looked at a couple different genes, different methylation patterns. I don't want to get too sciencey for most of you, but basically women taking oral contraceptives also had smaller hippocampal volumes. So when scanning the brain and looking at the hippocampus, then compared to the non-users, and the conclusion was that there is physiologic data to suggest that oral contraceptives are analogous basically to chronic psychological stress, and is probably why some women feel really depressed on birth control pills. Do you see that, Menno, in your female clients?
Some. I know that there is a lot of variance. I would say that in general, I think doctors are way too lenient at the moment with birth control for women. It's like they don't realize that you're putting hormones in someone's body, and we know how effective hormones are for men if you give men hormones for sports, for example. And clearly the idea that, oh, it's just a little bit of hormones for women, it doesn't matter, it doesn't have any side effects, that is just nonsense, because it's shutting down your fertility. Like, how can you possibly argue it doesn't have physiological effects? Like, that's a very big physiological effect, right? So I think there are in terms of psychology, there are many, many studies that birth control has profound effects on your choice of partner, your libido, depression risk. There are many things, and women differ a lot. Like with libido, for example, on average, I think the literature conclusion is that there is no effect on libido. Some literature even suggests an increase, but there are lots and lots of women who you talk to, and they will say, okay, that's great, that maybe that's true on average or in short-term studies, but it's definitely not true in the long term for every woman. There are lots of women who lose their libido to a big extent, and it makes sense because your testosterone levels go down a lot. We know testosterone is a big correlative predictor of libido. So yeah, there are definitely a lot of those mental effects of oral contraceptives that I think are massively under talked about at the moment, and that should be considered, because you're putting hormones in your body, and there's no free lunch. Like when you're doing something like this intensive that can shut down your fertility or do anything like that, it's also going to have a lot of other effects in the body. Just like with antibiotics, we first thought, oh, it doesn't have any side effects. Yes, it does. It wipes out the whole microbiome, and you get lots of side effects from that as well. It's just that we didn't know the side effects, and now we're becoming aware of a lot more side effects.
Yeah, don't mess around with nature. There's not. Do you? There are other, like I said, other birth control options for women. So progesterone only, we kind of touched on those, or even like non-hormonal things, obviously like condoms or the Paragard IUD, which is like a copper IUD. It's hard just to play devil's advocate slightly, because I have the same sentiments about oral contraceptive pills, but of course, like 50% of the pregnancies in the US are unplanned. So, it's like we want good birth control for people, but these are things that you really have to think about when it comes to, if you're a physique competitor or if you just really care about your metabolic health and longevity. I agree. These are things we really have to consider.
Yep. And IUDs are something that I think are not given the attention that they should, especially the copper one, because it's completely non-hormonal. Many women fear it because it makes menstrual bleeding worse and kind of aggravates menstrual symptoms. But if you respond well to it, it's amazing. It's non-hormonal, it's really effective. And yeah, if you don't have many of the side effects, then that's pretty much the ideal way to go about contraception, I would say.
Yeah, or even just the lower dose, progesterone IUDs, because it's a much more local effect than it is a systemic effect. So it's not like you're taking it as to get absorbed by the stomach and go straight to the liver. It's much more of a localized effect on the endometrium. So I'm a huge fan of IUDs, and I have 3 daughters, and people ask me all the time. That would be my probably go-to if I was looking for a reliable, and they're reliable. That's the thing too, is even more, they're more reliable than a pill. Yeah. So, well, Menno, this has been absolutely amazing. Tell people how they can find you and how they can find your work.
Sure. I'm on all the social media channels, YouTube, and best way to get to know my content is probably if you go to my website, mennohenselmans.com. I have a free email course, and it provides you with kind of a tour of my most popular contents, things that people like the most, including some articles specifically for women. So yeah, have a look and see if you like it.
Amazing. You guys go give him a follow. I love his content. It's really, really good. It's for both men and women, and it's evidence-based. He shares incredible studies, breaks them down in a way that you can understand them. So Menno, thank you. Thanks for everybody listening. Share this with all your friends and family.
Did you guys love that last episode of the Fit and Fabulous podcast? Well, of course you did. And I want to keep bringing you the most amazing content from the most incredible people. And you can help me by subscribing to the Dr. Fit and Fabulous channel. You guys know where the button is. Just click it. It's the doctor's orders.